December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Snow fell relentlessly, coating the dense pines and winding roads in a suffocating white blanket. The winter storm mirrored the uncertainty gripping the Allied High Command. The German army had launched a surprise offensive, the Ardennes counteroffensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. Their aim: split the Allied front, seize Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. At SHAF headquarters in Versailles, France, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, studied a sprawling map spread across a war room table. Tiny colored pins marked divisions. The Allied lines stretched like fragile threads, and a single red cluster in Bastogne caught his eye. The 101st Airborne Division, lightly armed and far behind enemy lines, was surrounded. Eisenhower rubbed his temple, feeling the weight of command like a physical burden. "If Bastogne falls," he muttered to his aides, "the Germans could drive a wedge through our lines. Every second counts." Around him, officers whispered about options, reinforcements, air supply drops, but the roads were clogged with snow and enemy forces. The winter had made maneuver almost impossible. Meanwhile, in England, General George S. Patton was already planning. Known for his audacious strategies and unyielding drive, he had kept the Third Army mobile, ready for any breakthrough. He strode across his headquarters, leather gloves on, eyes scanning maps that mirrored Eisenhower's concerns. "Gentlemen," he said, voice sharp, "if the boys in Bastogne need help, we'll move faster than they think possible. No weather, no roadblocks, nothing will stop us." Back in Versailles, Eisenhower considered his options. Patton had a reputation: brash, sometimes insubordinate, yet brilliant. With all conventional relief forces tied down or stalled, it became clear Patton's Third Army might be the Allies' last hope to prevent disaster. Outside, the snowstorm intensified. On the frozen roads, German tanks prowled, artillery fire shook villages, and the distant sound of rifle shots carried through the icy wind. Maps were marked, radios crackled, and the tension in Eisenhower's headquarters thickened. Every decision, every movement could tip the scales between catastrophe and salvation. Eisenhower's eyes lingered on Bastogne. In a low, resolute voice, he spoke to himself. A statement meant more for his own courage than anyone else. Patton is the only man who can do this, and he must. Cut to visual, a flickering overhead map highlighting Bastogne, snow-laden roads, and moving divisions, juxtaposed with Eisenhower's tense gaze, Patton's determined stride, and the encircled 101st bracing for the storm ahead. The stage is set. The last hope of the Allies hangs on one man's audacity. December 17, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. The town lay buried under nearly a foot of snow. The streets, lined with battered houses and icy debris, became a frozen labyrinth. German forces tightened their noose around the 101st Airborne Division. Every road out of Bastogne was mined, blocked, or under artillery fire. Inside the makeshift headquarters of the 101st, Major General Anthony McAuliffe pored over reports. Supplies were running perilously low, ammunition barely sufficient, medical supplies dwindling, food and winter clothing scarce. The men were exhausted, huddled in foxholes and abandoned buildings, their breaths forming icy clouds in the sub-zero air. The harsh winter storm lashed rooftops, turning every move outside into a fight against nature as well as the enemy. A signal crackled over the radio. The German commander, von Luttwitz, issued his infamous ultimatum: surrender the town and save your men from destruction. McAuliffe stared at the message, then at his officers. For a moment, silence filled the room, an icy, suffocating silence that matched the snow outside. Finally, he scrawled his reply, one word: nuts. The defiance echoed the spirit of the trapped soldiers, but it did not lessen the reality of the crisis. Every passing hour brought the 101st closer to being overrun, their lines stretched thin, their men exhausted, and the cold seeping into bones and morale alike. Far to the south, at SHAF headquarters, Eisenhower was receiving these updates. Officers paced around him, maps unfolded across tables, markers moving as the grim news arrived from Bastogne. "If we can't relieve Bastogne," one aide whispered, "the Germans could split our forces and take Antwerp before we can respond." Eisenhower's face hardened. He tapped a finger on the map, tracing a frozen road that led north through dense forests and snowdrifts, the only feasible route for a relief effort. He knew every hour counted. Delays could be catastrophic. His gaze shifted toward one name, Patton. The Third Army, despite being engaged on multiple fronts, was the only unit capable of moving fast enough through frozen roads, snow-choked towns, and German defenses to reach Bastogne. He called his chief of staff. "Get me Patton immediately. Tell him, there's no margin for error. Bastogne cannot fall. The 101st must hold until relief arrives." His voice, though calm outwardly, carried the tension of a man carrying the lives of thousands in his mind. Meanwhile, in Patton's headquarters, the general was already drafting orders. Maps were spread across tables, officers circling him, pencils marking roads, divisions, and artillery positions. Patton's mind raced, calculating distances, terrain obstacles, and German positions. "We move at dawn," he declared. "The snow, the enemy, the cold, none of it matters. Bastogne lives because we will make it live." The Third Army began mobilizing with relentless precision. Tanks rumbled across frozen fields, artillery units packed for the march, and truck convoys braved the snowstorm. Every minute lost was a risk to the surrounded paratroopers, every decision a gamble between life and annihilation. Back in Bastogne, soldiers huddled in foxholes, faces gaunt, eyes wary, yet holding fast. The whine of shells, the distant crash of burning buildings, and the icy wind reminded them that relief might not come in time. Internal monologues of desperation mixed with determination. "We cannot fall. We will not fall. We survive because we must." Cut to visual. The camera pans from Eisenhower's tense deliberations, to Patton issuing orders, to the freezing, beleaguered 101st bracing for bombardment. Snow swirls violently, soldiers' breaths mist in the air, tanks cut through drifts, and artillery fires streak across gray skies. The world feels suspended, waiting for a single, decisive movement. The stage is set. The Allies' last hope rests on a single army, a single general, and the fragile lives of thousands hang in the balance. December 18, 1944. Dawn broke over the Ardennes in muted gray, the snow still thick on the trees and roads, a blanket of white hiding both the way forward and the dangers ahead. Patton's Third Army faced an almost impossible task, a 90-degree pivot of hundreds of vehicles and divisions already engaged on other fronts, followed by a march of over 100 miles through blizzard, ice, and dense forests to reach the besieged town of Bastogne. At headquarters, Patton's staff worked feverishly. Maps were unfurled on every table, pencils marking routes, fuel depots, and supply points. Radio operators cracked out messages, while clerks compiled hourly updates from reconnaissance units. Trucks laden with ammunition and rations groaned through snowdrifts, tanks churned through frozen mud, and artillery units struggled to maintain formation over icy roads. Patton himself strode along the columns, eyes sharp, voice carrying above the roar of engines. Maximum effort. Every hour counts. The 101st cannot hold much longer. His officers nodded, adrenaline and fear mirrored in their eyes. Engineers cleared fallen trees, medics tended to frostbitten soldiers, and drivers navigated treacherous passes where a single slip could trap a convoy for hours or days. Back in Versailles, Eisenhower's war room was a flurry of reports. Maps dotted with markers and pins covered the tables. Aides whispered urgent updates. Each report from Patton's columns was a lifeline, or a warning. Third Army advancing north, snow slowing progress, one officer reported. One road blocked by ice and German artillery. Estimated delay, 6 hours. Eisenhower rubbed his eyes. He moved from map to map, tracing Patton's route with a trembling finger. Time was not just passing, it was bleeding away. He thought of the 101st exhausted paratroopers huddled in foxholes, surrounded, cold, hungry, yet holding fast. We are counting on Patton. Every minute matters. Meanwhile, in Bastogne, the 101st fought a desperate, grinding battle. Soldiers fired from snow-covered hedgerows, returned fire from burning buildings, and carried the wounded over frozen streets. Casualties mounted. The blizzard slowed any attempts at evacuation. A young corporal, his hands raw and red from the cold, whispered to a comrade, "We can't hold much longer, but we will hold." Patton's forces encountered setback after setback. Convoys became stalled in icy ruts, tanks slipped into ditches, and German artillery rained destruction on exposed roads. Communications faltered, radios froze, messages delayed. Yet, Patton's determination was absolute. Each hour, each mile, he pressed his men forward. Every tank, every truck, every man, we move or Bastogne falls, he barked. Night fell on the Ardennes, a deep, oppressive darkness broken only by headlights cutting through blinding snow. Officers huddled over maps, plotting routes by compass and memory. Exhausted soldiers dug in for brief rest, knowing dawn meant another punishing march. Eisenhower received a report. Third Army has cleared the forest pass, on schedule to reach Bastogne within 24 hours. Relief flickered across his face, but tension remained. The 101st had no certainty of survival if the delay worsened. Morning arrived, icy and gray, and the march continued. Tanks plowed through knee-deep snow, artillery shells rattling, engines groaning. Soldiers shouted over wind and gunfire, their voices barely audible through the storm. Reconnaissance reported German patrols trying to block the roads. Patton countered by rerouting columns, taking calculated risks, and moving with relentless pace. At Versailles, Eisenhower paused, leaning against a table littered with maps and dispatches. He muttered to himself, voice barely audible, "Patton, if anyone can do it, it's him. But the men in Bastogne. God help them if we're a moment too late." He felt the crushing weight of command, the thin line between hope and disaster. Across the Ardennes, the Third Army advanced like a living machine, engines roaring, soldiers straining against snow and fatigue. Every mile closed the gap between life and annihilation. Every hour reduced the window before Bastogne could fall. The stage was set. The Allies' last hope hurtled through a frozen hell, racing against time, weather, and a ruthless enemy to reach the 101st Airborne Defenders before it was too late. Visual cues, sweeping aerial shots of endless snow-covered roads, tanks plowing through drifts, soldiers carrying wounded under fire, night-to-day transitions showing relentless movement, Eisenhower poring over maps in tension, and the 101st huddled behind barricades, faces etched with exhaustion but resolute. December 26, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. The snow still lay thick on rooftops and frozen streets, but something had changed. The distant rumble of engines, the metallic clank of tanks, and the faint roar of artillery in support heralded the arrival of salvation. Patton's Third Army had done the impossible, a 100-mile march through blizzards, icy roads, and enemy fire, to reach the surrounded 101st Airborne Division. The first contact was cautious. Reconnaissance jeeps broke through the German cordon, exchanging fire, then signaling the trapped paratroopers. Soldiers in foxholes and barricaded streets initially squinted against the snow, wary of a trap, until the green and white insignias of the Third Army became unmistakable. Cheers erupted, muffled at first by frostbitten lips, then swelling as men scrambled through snowdrifts to greet the liberators. Major General Anthony McAuliffe's face cracked into a rare, exhausted grin. He lifted his hand in salute to Patton as a tank rolled down the main street, clearing debris and marking the first safe corridor. "By God, they're here!" he shouted over the wind and gunfire. Paratroopers embraced one another, tears freezing on cheeks, eyes bright with relief and disbelief. Patton moved among the men, shaking hands, nodding, his usual stern visage softened by pride and relief. He stopped beside McAuliffe, who saluted again. Patton replied with a half-smile, voice carrying over the snowstorm, "Just doing my job, Ike." The men did the real work. Back in Versailles, Eisenhower received the first direct reports. Officers leaned over maps, shouting updates. His secretary handed him the field telegraph. He read the words, and for a moment he closed his eyes, letting the weight of tension and months of planning lift slightly. A deep breath, and he whispered almost to himself, "No, George. You moved an army 90 degrees in a blizzard. You saved 10,000 lives. That's why you're invaluable." Eisenhower alone in his office, maps and letters scattered across the table, the snowstorm howling outside, and Patton on Bastogne streets, shaking hands with paratroopers, inspecting wounded men, and signaling engineers to clear remaining obstacles. Soldiers carried supplies into makeshift hospitals, artillery crews repositioned to fend off lingering German forces, and medics worked feverishly under freezing conditions. Heroism unfolded in quiet moments as well as dramatic ones. A young private lifted a fallen comrade from a snowdrift, ignoring the danger of snipers. A sergeant helped an elderly villager retrieve supplies trapped in her home. Tanks plowed through snow-choked streets, creating a corridor for trucks carrying food, ammunition, and medical aid. Smoke from burning barricades mingled with the icy fog, but the advancing column was unstoppable. Patton paused for a brief moment, looking at the town that had endured nearly 2 weeks of siege. He saw men embracing, children peering from windows, and paratroopers distributing rations to their exhausted comrades. This, he said quietly, almost to himself, this is why we fight. Not for glory, but for them. Eisenhower, too, allowed himself a moment of reflection. In a private office, he traced the lines of Bastogne on his map, fingers hovering over the road Patton's army had taken. He thought of every soldier in that blizzard, every command decision, every life teetering on the brink. A single tear slipped down his cheek, a rare acknowledgement of emotion for a man known for composure and restraint. Letters from soldiers arrived, scribbled in frost-stiffened handwriting. We thought we were lost, but the third came through. God bless Patton and the men. Eisenhower read a few aloud to aides, his voice steady but imbued with gratitude. The relief was not just tactical, it was human, profound, and lasting. The snow-swept streets of Bastogne, tanks crushing barricades, paratroopers hugging exhausted comrades, Patton clasping hands with McAuliffe, Eisenhower in his office scanning maps and letters, snow swirling through shattered streets, and fires burning in makeshift shelters as life slowly returns to the besieged town. As night fell over Bastogne, the town alive with the quiet hum of survival and movement, a sense of triumph and exhaustion mingled in the cold air. Soldiers huddled around small fires, writing letters, repairing weapons, and sharing meager meals. The immediate threat was over, but history had been made. Patton's gaze swept over the town one last time, and he muttered under his breath, voice carried by the wind, "We did what we had to do." Bastogne stands. The scene fades on the snow-covered streets, tanks in position, and soldiers waving to each other in relief, foreshadowing the final act, reflection on the legacy of courage, leadership, and the indomitable spirit of those who endured the Ardennes winter. December 27, 1944. Versailles, France. The snowstorm had eased, but the weight of the past weeks lingered heavily in SHAF headquarters. Eisenhower sat alone at his desk, maps spread across the table, letters from the front stacked neatly to one side. A single lamp cast a soft glow over the room, illuminating the lines of fatigue etched into his face. He picked up a pen and began to write in his private diary, a habit reserved for moments when the burden of command needed to be unburdened. The relief of Bastogne is more than a tactical victory. It is proof that audacity, speed, and trust in capable men can turn the tide against overwhelming odds. Patton moved an army through a blizzard, against enemy fire, when conventional wisdom said it could not be done. Yet he did, not for glory, but because it had to be done. The 101st Airborne, steadfast in the face of near annihilation, proved the human spirit is stronger than any obstacle. He paused, looking at a photograph of Patton, uniform immaculate even after weeks of relentless campaigning. Eisenhower's thoughts lingered on the personal courage of every soldier, the frostbitten paratroopers, the tank crews plowing through icy roads, the medics, the engineers, the men who did the impossible. Letters from Bastogne described soldiers sharing meager rations, carrying the wounded, and maintaining morale amidst chaos. Each note was a testament to endurance, bravery, and the bonds forged under fire. Eisenhower folded the letters, placing them beside the map where Bastogne was marked in red. He reflected on the larger meaning of leadership, the audacity to take calculated risks, the trust to empower those capable of extraordinary feats, and the humility to acknowledge their achievements. Decisions made in these moments were not abstract military maneuvers. They were life and death, hope and despair, courage made tangible. Cinematic narration sweeps across the Ardennes, snow glinting off tanks, paratroopers sharing quiet moments of celebration, villagers emerging from shelters to reclaim their town. Bastogne is no longer a battlefield frozen in fear, it is alive with human resilience. Soldiers repair vehicles, send letters home, and gather to share small victories with comrades who endured alongside them. Eisenhower returned to the map, tracing Patton's route with a steady finger, imagining the treacherous passes, the frozen forests, the endless miles of snow and ice. The operational brilliance of the Third Army, the foresight to pivot 90 degrees in the midst of chaos, and the relentless drive to save tens of thousands of lives became a defining moment, not just of the war, but of leadership itself. He closed his diary, setting the pen down with quiet satisfaction. Outside the window, the soft sunlight reflected off snow-laden trees, mirroring the glint of armored vehicles slowly moving through Bastogne. History, he thought, would remember the battle, the tactical maneuvers, the maps and divisions, but the human decisions, the audacity, and the courage were what truly defined it. Eisenhower whispered, almost as a benediction, "Patton, the men, the 101st. They remind us that leadership is not measured in orders alone, but in the courage to act when it matters most. The camera pans slowly over Bastogne, soldiers embracing, rebuilding, and tending to the wounded, tanks cutting through snow, columns moving in disciplined precision, the quiet snowfall a witness to human resilience. Voices of the men merge with narration, moments of fear, triumph, exhaustion, and relief, creating a mosaic of courage etched in time. Closing narration. History remembers the victories, the strategies, and the maps. But the human decisions, the audacity, and the courage define true leadership. In the Ardennes winter of 1944, Eisenhower, Patton, and the 101st Airborne demonstrated that brilliance and bravery, united in purpose, can change the course of history. Fade out, snow glinting on tanks, soldiers waving to one another, and the quiet streets of Bastogne, a testament to survival, courage, and the enduring spirit of those who led and fought when it mattered most.